Welcome to Break It Down to the T, where we don't just review movies, we dig into what they're really trying to do to your head.
You believe that?
I'd like to speak with Mary. What were you thinking? You shouldn't have listened to all of them. It's what she wants.
And today's movie Undertone gets inside it fast. This is the kind of horror movie that makes a pair of headphones feel like a loaded gun, and every harmless apartment noise sound personally targeted. It's lean, nasty, and far more interested in suggestion than spectacle. But beneath all that audio dread is one question the movie keeps dodging. What exactly has Claire heard? A supernatural presence, an elaborate deception, or the sound of her own mind turning against her? Hold that thought. Undertone follows Evie Babick, a paranormal podcaster caring for her comatose mother while recording remotely with her co-host, Justin. She's the skeptic, the person paid to discuss ghosts, while privately treating them like content with lousy evidence. Then an anonymous email delivers 10 audio recordings made by Mike and Jessa, a couple experimenting with Jessa's habit of talking in her sleep. Except she isn't talking. She's singing "London Bridge is Falling Down," already creepy. But when the recording is reversed, the familiar nursery rhyme appears to contain something far uglier. That's why the children's songs matter. They aren't tossed in because horror filmmakers have a legally binding obligation to ruin childhood. Nursery rhymes are among our earliest memories, repetitive, comforting, and passed down before we're old enough to question the words. Undertone corrupts that safety. By hiding possible messages inside "London Bridge" and "Ba, Ba, Black Sheep," it suggests that something sinister may have been sitting beneath familiar sounds all along, waiting for an adult foolish enough to press rewind. As Evie keeps listening, the recordings stop feeling like somebody else's haunting and begin bleeding into her own home. And eventually, one voice seems to know exactly who is listening. And this is where Undertone finds its nastiest idea. Listening is not passive. Listening is trespassing. Evie believes those recordings are safely contained inside her laptop. Mike and Jessa are somewhere else. Their house is somewhere else. Their problem belongs to another zip code entirely. She gets to sit behind a microphone, examine their nightmare, and turn it into an episode. It's the modern podcaster fantasy. Somebody else experiences the trauma. You add intro music and ask people to rate the show 5 stars. Except the movie slowly removes that distance. Every time Evie replays a file, reverses a nursery rhyme, or increases the volume, she is making a choice to go deeper. She isn't being chased by the horror. She keeps hitting play. That makes her less like the helpless victim in The Conjuring, and more like Naomi Watts watching the videotape in The Ring. The cursed object doesn't kick down your door. It waits for curiosity to do the delivery. And curiosity, as every horror fan knows, has murdered more people than Freddy Krueger. But Evie's curiosity isn't stupidity. It is avoidance. Upstairs, her mother is dying. Not horror movie dying, where somebody coughs twice, delivers a cryptic warning, and conveniently expires before explaining the third act. This is the slow, exhausting reality of caring for a terminally ill parent. Her mother lies unresponsive in bed. She has stopped eating and drinking. Evie cleans her, speaks to her, and waits for the horrifyingly ordinary sound the hospice nurse calls the death rattle. There is no mystery to solve and no supernatural theory that can make the situation interesting. Her mother is dying, and Evie can do nothing about it, so she goes downstairs and investigates a haunting. Because the recordings give her what illness cannot, a puzzle. There are files to organize, sounds to isolate, and hidden messages to decode. If a voice is buried beneath a nursery rhyme, Evie can reverse it. If her mother has something buried inside her silence, there is no software setting that can bring it out. One mystery promises an answer, the other ends with a body. That contrast is the emotional engine of Undertone. Evie is obsessively listening to strangers, while avoiding the unbearable silence of the person closest to her. She can replay Jessa's voice 100 times, but she may never hear her mother speak again. And suddenly, those noise-canceling headphones become more than a clever horror prop. They become a confession. When Evie puts them on, the entire house disappears. She cannot hear the pipes, the footsteps, or her mother upstairs. For a podcaster, that isolation is perfect. For a caregiver, it is terrifying. What if her mother calls out? What if she falls? What if she takes one final breath while Evie is downstairs listening to a dead woman sing "London Bridge"? That possibility sits underneath every recording session, and director Ian Tuason knows exactly how cruel it is. Undertone was inspired partly by his own experience caring for his terminally ill parents. He wrote the story while feeling trapped in his childhood home, then shot the movie inside that same house. So, the location isn't some production designer's spooky Airbnb filled with 12 crosses and an aggressively underpaid electrician. It is a real place connected to childhood safety, now transformed by illness into a waiting room for death. That personal history gives the film a weight its supernatural mechanics couldn't create alone. The house is frightening because Evie remembers when it wasn't. Her mother is frightening because she used to be the safest person in the room. Now that source of protection has become completely dependent on her. Michelle Duquet barely needs dialogue as Mama because her physical presence does the work. Every time the camera allows her to remain in the background, the audience starts monitoring her. Did her hand move? Was her head facing that direction before? Is that breathing part of the soundtrack? Or is it coming from the guy 2 seats behind me, who apparently bought nachos for an audio-driven horror film? Tuazin weaponizes our attention. We stop watching Evie and start inspecting Mama. A sick woman becomes the most frightening shape in the house, and that reaction makes us slightly ashamed. We know she is vulnerable. We know she needs care. Yet the horror grammar we have absorbed tells us that the apparently motionless body will eventually sit up. The movie forces compassion and suspicion into the same frame. It also changes the meaning of the children's songs. Evie sings Ba Ba Black Sheep to comfort her mother, almost as if their roles have reversed. The daughter is now soothing the parent with the kind of song a mother might once have sung to her child. Later, when similar songs appear inside the recordings and reveal possible messages in reverse, that act of comfort becomes contaminated. The melody connecting Evie to her mother is now connected to something threatening. That is much more effective than simply throwing a creepy nursery rhyme onto the soundtrack. The song carries memory. It belongs to childhood, motherhood, and the period when somebody else stayed awake to make sure you were safe. Undertone takes that emotional inheritance and corrupts it. Now Evie is the adult staying awake, except she is distracted, exhausted, and listening for danger in the wrong room. Nina Kiri plays that exhaustion without turning Evie into a screaming horror avatar. She looks depleted before the supernatural events even begin. Her skepticism doesn't feel like intellectual superiority. It feels like the final structure holding her together. If ghosts are fake, then death is at least understandable. Bodies fail, people disappear. The universe is brutal, but it follows rules. The recordings threaten those rules. And the film understands the psychological trick being played on both Evie and us. It is called auditory pareidolia, the brain's habit of discovering meaningful words inside ambiguous sound. Give someone enough static and tell them a demon is whispering a sentence, and eventually, their brain will clock in for the night shift and manufacture one. It's the audio version of seeing a face in an electrical outlet, except the outlet usually isn't asking you to murder anybody. Justin hears messages because he believes. Evie hears them because she is challenged not to. And we hear them because the film has already planted the words in our heads. That makes the audience complicit. We lean forward, we strain, we want the meaningless noise to become a sentence, because a sentence is more exciting than static. Then, Undertone makes us wonder whether recognition itself is the invitation. Maybe the evil isn't physically stored inside the files like malware. Maybe it requires a listener willing to complete the sound. Every replay strengthens the pattern. Every interpretation gives it shape. Evie thinks she is uncovering something that already exists, but what if she is helping create it? And that brings us back to her mother. Evie has one woman upstairs whose silence she cannot accept, and another woman inside the recordings whose voice she cannot stop analyzing. One represents a loss she is powerless to prevent. The other offers the seductive possibility that death, suffering, and fear have a hidden explanation. So perhaps Evie isn't really hunting a ghost. Perhaps she is bargaining with grief. She would rather believe the house has been invaded than admit it is already haunted by something completely natural. The knowledge that her mother will soon be gone. But the deeper she listens, the more the two fears begin to merge. The dying mother and the voice in the recording no longer occupy separate floors of Evie's life. And now our original question becomes even worse. Is something using those recordings to enter Evie's home? Or has it been waiting inside that home, inside that grief, for Evie to finally hear it? And this is where Undertone stops asking whether Evie believes in demons and starts asking whether she can trust the most basic piece of evidence she has, her own ears. That distinction matters because horror usually gives us something to look at. A shadow moves, a door opens, a pale Victorian child stands in the hallway despite contributing absolutely nothing toward the mortgage. Even if the character questions what happened, the audience gets visual confirmation. Here, the sound arrives without proof. Evie hears movement above her, while her mother is supposedly incapable of moving. She hears noises, slipping beneath Justin's voice. The house creaks at precisely the wrong moment. But because she is wearing noise-canceling headphones, she can never be certain whether a sound came from the recording, the room, or the anxious little projection booth inside her skull. Ian Tuasin turns the sound mix into an unreliable narrator. Sometimes we hear what Evie hears through her headphones. Sometimes we hear the house around her. Sometimes those two spaces overlap so quietly that we don't realize the border has disappeared. That is the movie's real haunting, not a demon jumping from one house to another, but the collapse of distance between recorded sound and physical reality. It's also why watching Undertone at home is either the ideal experience or a terrible financial decision. One unexplained knock in the theater belongs to the movie. One unexplained knock in your apartment means you're pausing at 24 and checking Zillow. Tuasin came into the film with experience creating three-dimensional soundscapes for virtual reality, and you can feel that background in the way noises are positioned. A creak doesn't merely happen, it seems to come from somewhere. Above Evie, behind her, just outside the room, the empty parts of the frame begin feeling occupied because the sound has already placed something there. The movie understands that ears are easier to manipulate than eyes. Show us a monster, and we immediately start judging the design. Too much CGI, not enough CGI. Looks like the creature from Smile had a baby with a Hot Topic mannequin. But let us hear something breathing in an empty room, and our imagination handles the production budget. And Evie's imagination is already running on fumes. She is recording at 3 in the morning because Justin is working from London. She is exhausted, grieving and emotionally trapped inside the house where she grew up. Sleep deprivation alone can make a coat on a chair look like it has unresolved business with you. Add a dying parent, 10 possible demonic recordings, and a co-host who genuinely believes in the supernatural, and skepticism begins to feel less like rational thought and more like Evie desperately trying to keep the walls standing. Justin is essential to that breakdown because he is both Evie's lifeline and her enabler. Adam DeMarco plays him almost entirely as a voice, which is a strange reversal after The White Lotus made his face internationally recognizable as Albi Di Grasso, the human embodiment of "I'm one of the good guys," moments before making an extremely expensive decision. In Undertone, that gentle, reasonable quality becomes useful. Justin doesn't sound like a conspiracy nut broadcasting from a bunker lined with aluminum foil. He sounds calm, concerned, trustworthy, which makes his belief much more dangerous. If Justin were screaming "demon" after every burst of static, Evie could dismiss him. Instead, he listens carefully, suggests interpretations, and allows the possibility of something supernatural to grow by inches. He gives Evie just enough validation to continue opening files that every functioning adult would have dragged directly into the trash. Their skeptic versus believer dynamic also creates a trap. The more Justin believes, the more Evie feels obligated to resist. Skepticism becomes her role on the show. She cannot simply admit she is frightened, because doing so would mean surrendering her identity, her authority, and possibly her sanity, all before the ad break. But the investigation becomes much harder to... The stories inside them repeatedly circle pregnancy, infants and mothers harming their children. Jessa is pregnant. A crying baby appears inside another terrifying call. The reversed voices point Evie and Justin toward Abizu, a demonic figure associated in ancient traditions with miscarriages, infant deaths, and violence against mothers and children. That revelation could easily have turned Undertone into a Wikipedia page with Dolby Atmos. And, honestly, the movie occasionally gets dangerously close. Characters research folklore, explain connections, and assemble mythology with the efficiency of people who know the third act cannot begin until everybody has read the same Reddit thread. But the Abizu angle works because it targets the conflict Evie is already refusing to confront. She doesn't receive the news of her pregnancy with uncomplicated joy. She is frightened by it. She questions whether she wants the child and whether she is capable of becoming a mother while watching her own mother die. The same house now contains 3 generations. A mother disappearing, a daughter caught between roles, and a possible child who has not yet entered the world. That's not a family tree. That's a psychological pressure cooker. Evie has spent the film caring for someone who can no longer respond to her. She feeds her mother, cleans her, and monitors every breath. Now, pregnancy presents her with the possibility of starting that cycle again from the opposite end, becoming completely responsible for another helpless human being, just as the first responsibility is destroying her. The demon does not create that fear. It gives the fear a face. Or, more accurately, a sound. This is where Undertone joins a long tradition of pregnancy horror, from Rosemary's Baby to The First Omen, where the body becomes a location that can be invaded, interpreted, and controlled by outside forces. But Evie's terror is more contemporary. Nobody around her needs to lock her inside an apartment and feed her suspicious desserts. The haunting enters through technology, medical uncertainty, and the endless stream of information telling her what motherhood is supposed to mean. Everyone has an opinion. Justin has a theory. The recordings have a warning. Religious imagery around the house silently imposes its own judgment. Even Evie's unresponsive mother seems to become part of the argument. And the one voice Evie cannot clearly hear is her own. That makes the backwards messages especially clever. Reversal suggests that the truth exists, but only in a form that must be manipulated before it becomes understandable. Evie keeps turning other people's voices backward because she cannot say her own fear forward. She may not want this pregnancy, and she feels guilty for even thinking it. The demon exploits that guilt because religious horror loves guilt the way Marvel loves skybeams. Evie comes from a Catholic background, yet prayer offers no comfort. The Virgin Mary appears less like a source of protection and more like an impossible standard, the eternally serene mother watching Evie panic over whether she wants to become one at all. So, when religious objects begin moving around the house, the question isn't merely whether Abizu is present. The question is whether Evie's buried shame is rearranging the world around her. Nina Kiri makes that ambiguity believable because she never flips from skeptical to possessed horror lady in one scene. She frays gradually. The podcast sequences were reportedly filmed largely in chronological order, allowing Kiri to track Evie's unraveling as each recording pushes her further. You can see the change in how she listens. Early on, she analyzes sounds. Later, she braces against them. By this point, listening is no longer investigation. It is self-surveillance. Evie studies every noise for proof that she is being watched, punished, or selected. The recordings appear to know about her pregnancy. The callers seem to reach through the podcast. Strangers' stories begin echoing decisions she hasn't shared with them. Which leaves us with a deeply uncomfortable possibility. What if the recordings were never sent to the podcast? What if they were sent specifically to Evie? Because if something inside those files knows she is pregnant, knows the name she once imagined giving her child, and knows exactly which guilt will make her keep listening, then this isn't a random haunting spreading through audio. It's a message with an address. And Evie may have been the intended listener long before she ever pressed play. And then Undertone finally stops whispering. During the live podcast, the distance between Evie's private life and the recordings completely collapses. A caller claiming to be Mike and Jess's neighbor confirms that the couple were found dead at the bottom of their stairs with plastic bags over their heads. Jessa was pregnant. Their walls were covered with drawings of dead babies. So much for Evie's comforting little, maybe it was a hoax theory. Then another caller asks to speak to Mary, the name Evie once imagined giving her own child. Justin doesn't know that name. The audience barely has time to process the violation before a woman calling herself Abby phones in with a crying baby and performs the film's most disturbing act entirely through sound. No monster, no expensive prosthetic. Just a baby crying, two helpless voices begging her to stop, and our imagination doing unpaid overtime. By now, Undertone has answered part of its mystery. The recordings were not randomly discovered. Jessa's warning was meant for the person listening in the future. The files knew Evie would hear them. They knew she was pregnant. They knew the name Mary. This was never an investigation. It was an appointment. But the crucial mistake wasn't simply opening the email. It was playing the final recording and reversing Jessa's voice. What sounded like nonsense becomes an invocation. Come in, Abizu. Remember the question we started with? Does the entity live inside the recording? Or does listening give it somewhere new to live? There's our answer. The recording is not haunted in the traditional sense. It is a door, but a door that requires participation. Abizu cannot simply crawl out of an MP3 like some demonic Spotify exclusive. Someone must isolate the sound, reverse it, and play the invitation aloud. Evie and Justin believe they are uncovering the message. In reality, they are completing it. And that is such a beautifully nasty update of the cursed media formula. In The Ring, you watch the tape. In Candyman, you say the name. In Evil Dead, you read the passage. Undertone makes the modern equivalent feel completely natural. Two content creators accidentally summon a demon while trying to improve their episode. Honestly, that is probably how civilization ends. The algorithm demands consistent uploads, and one exhausted podcaster eventually opens capital F, capital I, capital N, capital A, capital L underscore capital D, capital M, capital O, capital N underscore capital A, capital U, capital D, capital I, capital O underscore V10 underscore, capital R, capital E, capital A, capital L. .wav. Once invited, Abizu doesn't appear as a carefully lit creature waiting for her franchise close-up. She enters through the person Evie least expects to fear and most desperately wants to trust, her mother. Before the final attack, Evie admits her mother has died. She feels guilty because she refused to pray when her mother asked her to. That confession matters. Evie's skepticism was never just a position she adopted for the podcast. It was tied to a much older conflict with faith, obedience, and the expectations handed down from mother to daughter. Her mother represented the belief Evie rejected. The pregnancy represents the motherhood Evie isn't sure she wants. Abizu places herself directly between them. Then, Evie goes upstairs. The walls are suddenly covered in childlike drawings of dead infants, and the demon itself. Her mother, who could barely move, who may already be dead, is standing in the bathroom. And for the first time in the film, Mama is no longer someone Evie must protect. She is something Evie must survive. The attack happens in chaos. We hear Evie screaming for her mother to stop. The imagery of the plastic bag echoes Mike and Jessa's deaths, suggesting that Abizu repeats the same ritual through each infected home. The movie cuts away without giving us the comforting paperwork. We don't receive a body count, an autopsy, or a post-credit scene where Justin launches a spin-off podcast called My Co-Host Was Murdered by Ancient Mediterranean Folklore. But the implication is brutal. Abizu has possessed Evie's mother and is attacking Evie to destroy the unborn child. Whether Evie technically survives is left uncertain. Emotionally, the ending has already killed the one thing she needed most, the idea that her mother's room was still a place of safety. That is why the mother angle is not merely tragic decoration. Ian Tuason said he wanted to haunt the safest place a frightened child knows, the mother. Evie has spent the movie moving between two versions of motherhood. Upstairs is the mother she is losing. Inside her is the child she may not choose to keep. Abizu, a demon defined by jealousy toward mothers and infants, invades both relationships at once. And yet, this is also where undertone becomes slightly less effective. For most of the film, it terrifies us with uncertainty. A creak might be a pipe, a voice might be auditory pareidolia. Mama might have moved, or Evie might be so exhausted that she no longer knows where she left the Virgin Mary statue. That restraint forces us to participate. But in the final stretch, the movie begins explaining itself like it suddenly remembered there would be a quiz. We get the demon's name, mythology, pregnancy connection, invocation, and rules. The walls fill with drawings. The dead mother stands up. Subtlety packs a suitcase and catches the last bus out of town. Some viewers will love that escalation. Others may feel that undertone was scarier when it was just a woman in headphones wondering whether the noise came from upstairs. I'm somewhere in the middle. The mythology is not as original as the filmmaking. We have seen cursed recordings, demonic motherhood, and dead relatives standing in dark rooms before. Rosemary's Baby, The Ring, Hereditary, and half the horror section at your local streaming service have fingerprints somewhere on this thing. But Undertone finds a fresh delivery system. Its best weapon is not Abizu, it is attention. The movie understands that the moment someone tells you there is a hidden voice inside static, you will search for it. Once you hear the sentence, you can't return it to noise. Your brain has accepted the pattern. That is the real undertone, the meaning waiting beneath the sound and the fear waiting beneath Evie's skepticism. So what exactly did Evie hear? Yes, within the movie's reality, she heard something supernatural. The calls know too much. The recordings predict her arrival, and her mother's final movement pushes the story beyond a purely psychological explanation. But the presence becomes terrifying because it speaks in Evie's own emotional language. It sounds like guilt over her mother. It sounds like fear of pregnancy. It sounds like resentment toward the caregiving role that has trapped her inside that house. Abizu doesn't invent Evie's darkest thoughts. She finds them, reverses them, and plays them back until Evie can no longer pretend they are just noise. And that is where undertone lands its final blow. The scariest voice in the recording was never the one speaking backward. It was the one Evie recognized as her own. So, is undertone worth listening to? Absolutely. But watch it the way it was designed. Lights off, phone down, headphones on, and every appliance in your apartment suddenly under investigation. Ian Tuason doesn't reinvent demonic horror. The mythology is familiar. The final act explains a little too much, and horror fans will spot its bloodline early. But he does something harder. He makes an invisible threat feel physical. He turns static into a doorway, silence into evidence, and the act of pressing replay into the worst decision anyone has made since that family followed the realtor into the house from The Conjuring. Nina Kiri carries the film with a performance built on exhaustion rather than theatrics. Her fear works because Evie already looks haunted before anything supernatural arrives by grief, responsibility, guilt, and a future she cannot decide whether she wants. Undertone may not leave you terrified of demons. It may leave you terrified of recognizing a voice where there should only be noise. And tonight, when your headphones pick up one sound you don't remember recording, do yourself a favor, don't reverse it. This is Break It Down to the T. Subscribe and tell me, what did you hear?